the show today. We are asking the question, can you be kinda fat in the NBA? The first thing we have to discuss is, what does it mean to be fat? Fat has become a derogatory or pejorative term in American culture. So much so that I really don't feel that comfortable using it. I prefer using a medical term like overweight or obese, because it feels more objective and less mean. But in the context of analyzing professional athletes, there's definitely a standard body type we've grown to expect for different sports, specifically in basketball in the year 2024. Most NBA players tend to have pretty low body fat percentages, and that's what we're going to be looking at, not BMI, body mass index. So technically, I'm not going to call any of these players obese or overweight, because those are objective classifications based on their BMI. And if we went based on BMI, I'm sure Tristan Thompson and David Roddy would both be considered obese, because BMI doesn't take into account muscle mass. But let's go back into the past and analyze some players who played the game carrying around a significant amount of body fat. The go-to example is Oliver Miller. Oliver Miller was a very successful college basketball player, playing for the Arkansas Razorbacks. But even then, he was big. He was 6'9" and 300 pounds. And his size was definitely a part of his game. He used it to his advantage, because he couldn't jump particularly high, but he had great footwork. He could also guard players in the post pretty well. I was watching a few clips of him guarding Shaq in college. He didn't exactly lock him down, but you could tell there were certain things that he learned how to do that kept Shaq from isolating him in the post, like timing when the basketball was passed so he knew how to get in front of Shaq. But mainly, his skill set was that sort of old man style basketball, where he had good court awareness, he knew where guys were. He also had a little bit of that Dennis Rodman rebounding ability. He had a similar post game to what Jokic has now, and a mathematical understanding of how the ball will bounce off the rim, accompanied by great hand-eye coordination. Oliver Miller had a lot of skill. He was good. And for a guy who entered the NBA at probably about 25% body fat, being selected 22 overall is awesome. Even his teammate Charles Barkley said he would have been an all-star if he would have only learned 2 words. I'm full. It's a good one, Chuck. Being that Chuck was his teammate, I'm sure he saw all of his eating habits. He knew it wasn't like a thyroid condition or something like that. Guy liked to eat. And by all accounts, Miller was a very stubborn guy with a temper. He had a few criminal charges that aren't germane to this video. I only bring them up because Jerry Colangelo, the GM of the Suns at the time, said this after trading him. When I talked about Oliver, I talked about personal accountability. When you make a mistake, you admit a mistake. The problem with Oliver is he was never accountable. Now, more than likely, he was talking about the criminal charges specifically. But the point is, Miller couldn't take responsibility for anything that went wrong in his career, including his increasing weight gain. Eventually, when he joined the Sacramento Kings, his weight had gone up to 400 pounds. For reference, the heaviest player in the league right now is Jusuf Nurkic at 290 pounds. That's 110 pounds less, and Nurkic is 7 feet tall. Oliver Miller was 6'9". So let's talk about the body shaming aspect of this. The time period was the 1990s, and ridiculing someone for their weight was commonplace. People did it all the time. It didn't seem as cruel as it does now. I could go over a list of insults I heard from players and coaches and media members, but that would just feel like I'm insulting him again. So I'm not going to. But trust me when I say one of Miller's main antagonists was Charles Barkley, his team, who had his own weight problems, remember? Which caused me to think about the reasons people humiliate each other in general. I believe that Barkley really cared about Miller. I think he saw Miller as his brother and he wanted him to live up to his potential. For Oliver, but also for Chuck, because he wanted the Suns to be good. Consciously or subconsciously, I think Chuck knew Oliver Miller isn't going to respond to an intervention style sit down where he says, "We need to talk about your weight, buddy." His ego was too big for that. I think Miller's teammates knew the only way to motivate him was ridicule him and attack that ego in hopes that the humiliation would change his behavior. But it obviously never did. It sucks because he played 10 seasons in the league, and if he'd lost 100 pounds rather than gain 100 pounds over the course of his career, what would his career have been like? I think we're seeing this now with Zion Williamson. And I have to say, the body shaming has kind of worked, right? I think a lot of times the body shaming from fans comes from a place of personal insecurity, just like criticism does with most celebrities or people we don't know very well. It's very easy to project our issues onto other people or just point out the flaws in other people. And also, there's an element of jealousy to it. These guys are living awesome lives, they're making tons of money. Sometimes we're not feeling great about our own lives, and we want other people to not feel great either. Kevin Durant knows what I'm talking about. So a lot of criticism that Zion received was just from haters and people with no vested interest in Zion's career. But there were a lot of people that fat shamed Zion because they cared about his potential and knew he wasn't living up to it. The Mardi Gras after Zion got his contract extension, there was a float featuring Zion that was not only mean, but well-informed too. It showed that they knew Zion was really well paid, he was injury prone, and that he had put on a lot of weight. It's bad, I know. It has to be the most disrespectful demonstration of disapproval from any fan base that I've ever seen in any city. But I'm for it because I think it goes back to the accountability thing. These were just New Orleans fans saying, hey, you're not meeting expectations. And with great wealth comes great expectations. And for a guy who up up until that point had only played half the games in his career and was the highest paid player on that team. Gaining 50 pounds during his tenure as a Pelican was unacceptable. And of course, during this sustained period of injury, Shaq and Chuck had to dogpile on top too.
Look like me and Shaq had a baby. What it look like, Chuck? Me and you had a baby. He eat good in New Orleans. I'm concerned.
Okay.
I am really concerned. I'm being critical. It is what it is.
Moses Malone.
Moses Malone said to me, he said I was fat and lazy. And I started to cry a little bit. It was a turning point in my career.
So Chuck's been through the same thing, and I don't think this is really bullying. First of all, because Zion is a person of high status who took on those high expectations when he signed that $200+ million extension. And I think this is tough love coming from Chuck because he can relate. He tells the story about Moses Malone all the time. And Malone cared about Chuck, so he helped him lose 50 pounds and get into the Sixers starting lineup. Chuck accepted that the reason he wasn't getting playing time was himself. And I think that's the reason why he got so frustrated with Oliver Miller. I'm sure all of Oliver's coaches and his teammates told him, dude, you gotta lose some weight. And he wasn't trying to hear it because he was too proud. So really, a player's body or his physique is no one's business, unless it's pertinent to that player not meeting his expectation. Fans are relatively forgiving if you get injured. It happens, people understand that. But if it feels like the that happened was within the player's control, they're going to be significantly less compassionate, right? But in Zion's defense, he never complained about it. He never made himself a victim. He took it on the chin and he just kept playing when he got healthy. Then I think the most criticism came this year in the in-season tournament semifinals. The Pelicans got blown out by the Lakers 89-133. The Pelicans played no defense. Zion missed 5 of 6 free throws and he ended the game with 13 points. It was a terrible loss, and the worst part is it was against LeBron James. So there was this obvious comparison between this lean and mean 39-year-old LeBron James and this rotund 23-year-old Zion Williamson.
He looks fat. En route while LeBron James had dropped 30 in 3 quarters and had completely dominated and looked in peak physical condition and looked like an absolute stud and superstar, Zion Williamson, who's more than 15 years younger, but 40 pounds heavier.
But after that game, over the next 3 months, Zion would lose 25 pounds. The body shaming worked. Zion played 70 games that season, more than he's ever played, and he finished with some All-NBA votes. So I think there's this very thin line between ridiculing someone for their weight and holding someone accountable for their actions. But figuring out whether someone's intentions are cruel or good is kind of irrelevant to the player. The only thing that matters is the criticism going to help that player take accountability? So let's talk about Luca a bit. First of all, it's really hard for me to be critical of Luca. The guy has been first team All-NBA 5 times in the 6 years he's been in the league. That's something that no one has done since Jerry West in 1967. This season was definitely Luca's heaviest season, and he made first team All-NBA, he made it to the finals, and he won the scoring title. And he's played 90% of the games in his career. There's no argument that size is keeping him from being healthy, like in the case of Zion. Even if Luca looked like Oliver Miller, you really couldn't tell him nothing. When someone is as good as him, you really wouldn't want to change anything. But he definitely looks weird with so much weight on him out there. I believe we've gotten used to this platonic idea of what a professional athlete looks like. I think the more distant they are from the average person, and the closer they look to a T800 defines how much potential they have. But it's just not the case. Guys like Thon Maker and Semi Ojeleye were physical specimens, but they couldn't stay in the league for more than a few years. Meanwhile, guys like Jokic and Chet Holmgren have far from impressive bodies, but they're 2 of the most dominant big men in the league. Basketball is a contact sport, but it's not football. Muscle mass and strength really isn't that relevant. Timing and the way you use your center of gravity is far more important. A guy like Zach Randolph was not tall, he was not lean, and he couldn't even jump that high, but he was amazing at getting rebounds. And look at these shots, man, he's barely getting off the ground. But he knows how to use his body to give himself enough space to get a clean shot off. No one cared what Zebo looked like. He was good. That was the end of it. He was valuable. No one wanted him to change anything about his game. A guy that reminds me of Zebo is Kenny Lofton Jr. I was watching Lofton highlights, and you can tell he's got a lot of skill. He's a natural scorer, he can play make, and he gets bored. Lofton has only played 45 games in his NBA career and only averaged 8 minutes a game. But one of those games, he scored 42 points and got 14 rebounds. The talent is there, but the weight is getting in the way of him reaching his potential. Teams are concerned about signing him to a long-term contract because he gets winded easily, there's no explosiveness to his game, and he doesn't get back on defense very fast. So you kind of lose a player on transition. So that's a player whose body fat I think does actually matter, not Luca. And just because a player isn't svelte doesn't mean that they don't have stamina. I think that's a very common misconception. Carrying an extra 10 or 15 pounds slows a player down far less than you would imagine. Someone's physical appearance isn't an accurate indicator of their cardiovascular health. If you've ever ran a marathon, you've noticed that there are people of all body types there, and you'd never expect some of the people whose dust you're eating. The real problem with Luca is what Windhorst said.
His defensive performance is unacceptable. He is a hole on the court. The Celtics are attacking him. They are ahead in this series because they've attacked him defensively. And you've got a situation here where Luca is complaining about the officiating. They have begged him. They have talked with him. They have pleaded with him. He is costing his team because of how he treats the officials.
So my personal opinion, if a player is awesome and he's meeting expectations or exceeding them, to make any negative comment on their body is toxic. Alright, well thanks for being here. If you liked the video, like the video. If you didn't like it, didn't think it was good, go thumbs down on the video. If you have a recommendation, I always reply to everything. So yeah, leave a recommendation, give me a title that you think would be good. Be good to your mother, eat a corn dog.